This is the title poem, Neon Manila. When you were not so quick to reveal such details like your number, your real address, your pangalan sa gabi, your name at night, you come across challenging, come across coy, in a way that seems to work against you. Your innocence constantly petted, praised like an act you got right. You're a foe-like when in comparison to all that they are, all that they have let the world force them to become, that some days you feel you cannot be gentle without bouncing off of something so violent. Joseph, the doctor next door, touches your leg as he asks you out on a date. Everything he'll pay for, so long as he tastes your sweet. Yes, he says all Filipinos make wonderful caretakers, and his back has been hurting all week. Then there's Justin online, who's looking for someone to experiment with, who's been talking to only you all day because you're just the right balance of sweet and flexible to fit into his straight guy fantasy. And then there's Jason, who's always on about porn, who calls you sweet every time you mention Pablo or Cliff or Rahim, admires your face, how it remains soft even after seeing so much hardness. Back on Grindr, a gray-shaped face is looking for Chinese bot, threesome near Battersea, reply quick. You think about deleting the app. See if the weight of your phone lifts, if the heat stops picking at your fingertips. After the first date, Jay texts you to ask if you're wearing your Speedos. Jay assumes you have Speedos. You send him a mirror selfie in boxers and receive a simple thanks like you would a last-minute work email. You screenshot poems from this manuscript for feedback. He's a teacher, lover of the word. He says he hates the amount of awful men you've had to endure. He says you make the violent read so beautifully. On X, formerly Twitter, an American recommends the Philippines to a friend, also an American, as a one-way ticket from being a 4 to a real-life 9. 10 even, he says, if his eyes are blue like something new or green like something expensive. The same green taxi drivers will see as a sign to take the long way and fatten up the meter. But that's okay, he says. That's part of the experience. In loss and being lost, you find yourself. Later, 4.1K tweets will disagree. Before deleting said tweet, the American will lament, ask, what's wrong? Aren't all Filipinos forgiving? Aren't they meant to be tolerant and hospitable? Like clockwork every lunch break, your colleague will come in the staff room demanding Filipino food, or else he'll have you deported. Today, he cuts the hour in half, telling you about the time he backpacked Asia. He remembers how the humidity agreed with him, how humongous the geckos were, how Angeles City was full of girls, all ages and demeanors. It's like being inside a candy store. Before your second date, Jay texts you to ask if you could wear anything that isn't a turtleneck. He says he finds your neck so arousing, the same way he finds your leg hair arousing, and wishes you wouldn't be so formal about the way you dressed. All of this to say that you are their Manila soaked in neon, their club scene chaos, housed inside a porcelain doll who can only carry so much, their man cave metropolis for when the wife and kids taste like chewed out gum, their mornings hazy with traffic and frantic, their nights exhaling smoke. You, angel of light, promise of something more.
Shemai and hello, Troy. It is such an honour to be able to talk to you about your poetry and about your recently published collection. And thank you very much for making the time to talk to me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to talking about my book with you.
So the first question is, I'd love to know how poetry started, and in particular how all the languages you grew up with have shaped the poetry you write today.
So, I would say my first memory of writing poetry started when I was 15, when I was in year 11, so this was be around 2010. At that point, I was so sure I was going to be an actor or I was going to be a novelist, both endeavors which proved to be quite time consuming and exhausting. And then we started our sort of GCSE in English literature in year 11, and that's when I studied poems by John Agard and Caroline Duffy, and Derek Walcott specifically, whose poems I absolutely adored. And I remember we were given a prompt, sort of like a list of devices, like a simile and alliteration and enjambment, and I went home and wrote my own poem, and I felt like the bug was never going to stop biting. So yeah, I've been writing ever since. I sort of started getting my poems published from 2013 through sort of publications and websites and journals that likely don't exist anymore, but I was able to build a portfolio of published work up until 2016 when I joined the Barbican Young Poets program, which is a sort of fortnightly workshop space led by Jacob Sam-LaRose and assisted by Rachel Long at the time, where sort of like 16 to 25-year-old poets would come together every other Wednesday and produce work and sharpen their craft and be in community with each other and just grow as young poets. And by the end of it, we had a showcase at the Milton Court Theatre where we performed our poems, and there was an anthology. And I think at that point, that was kind of my first experience of being validated as a poet, and not just as a writer, but as a poet, which carried me into lengths that I did not realize until I got to where I am now, where I'm talking about my work at length. So yeah, that's kind of how I started. Then in terms of the languages, so I'm a Filipino immigrant. I come from the Philippines and I was born there, and I moved to the UK when I was 12. So that was 2007. And I still speak Tagalog fluently. I had a British accent when I was a teenager, but then the pandemic rendered me sort of stuck at home for about 6 months, and I watched a lot of Jane Fonda TV shows and movies, and then the accent just stuck to me. And this kind of feels more organic accent. In terms of poetry, I'm trying to sort of come into terms with where I am as a writer of Tagalog language, as in, like, I rarely write poems in Filipino or in Tagalog, because poetry at the moment feels like a very English, like, craft in my brain. I feel like the part of my brain that knows how to write poems is the part of my brain that's specifically orbiting around the English language, which can be quite problematic. But I do speak Filipino very fluently. Like, when I'm tired, I speak Tagalog to people who don't speak Tagalog. So yeah, and I think writing in Filipino is something that's feeling more like a challenge that I'm coming towards. I recently wrote a poem in English for a festival at the Barbican Center, for the Voiced Festival, curated by Chris McCabe and Sam Winston, fantastic artists. And the challenge was that I would write a poem in English and then translate that into Filipino, which I was quite daunted by at first. But then after having done it, it was very fulfilling and felt like connecting pieces of myself in a very organic and a very healing way. So that's a challenge that I'm excited to re-enter when the time comes. Yeah, that's where I'm at with the languages. Although they both carry equal weight in my brain, which is to say that I'm fluent in neither at the end of the day. So, yeah.
If I may, I wanted to ask a follow-up question
Yeah.
about, you mentioned a number of great poets you've been influenced by. You mentioned Caroline Duffy,
Mhm.
Derek Walcott, and I kind of You know, because I'm a huge admirer of Derek Walcott, so I would be interested to find out, you know, what was it about Walcott as a poet that attracted you?
It was the poem Love After Love. That was what we studied in year
Love that
11, and
poem.
then we ended up carrying that towards the very end of that year with our exams and our essays. And I remember just kind of reading that poem over and over again. And because I was 15, what did I know about life? I thought the poem was kind of, it was a love poem from the speaker to an object or like another person of their desires. And it took a lot of persuading and a lot of helping, you know, the teacher helping me to access that part of my brain that read poems to kind of understand that the poem is about self-love, and the uncovering of that layer of the poem was really fascinating to me, and it blew my mind. Yeah, I think that the double consciousness of a poem that Derek Walcott introduced me to through that poem is something that has stuck to me and something that I still admire to this day and kind of wish to emulate. I think that's kind of been my whole journey as a poet. To kind of create a piece of work that can be 10 different things to 10 different people, you know, and they're all being valid interpretations. So, yeah.
The visual aesthetic of fashion and appearances form a stunning motif in your poetry. This is quite unique and also renders the poetic tone at once relatable and relevant. I'd love to know more about this, please.
I loved writing about clothing and fashion and jewelry in this collection, Neon Manila, because it felt like I was getting away with something as a poet. As I say, I'm a Filipino immigrant. My body is very obviously non-white and very much queer as well. And sort of my introductory experiences into poetry had a lot of experiences of people kind of expecting a certain kind of poem from me, sort of poems about food from my culture or certain specific lived experiences of being Filipino in the Philippines, and kind of, a very kind of individual, but kind of made, kind of plural kind of experience of immigration from one country to another. And I've always had a bit of a pushback from that because my immigrant story is quite different from, of a parent leaving their child behind to go to work in in another country. It's been quite different for me. So that was kind of the basis of that way of thinking. It's kind of coming into terms with my own experience of being where I am, and also this kind of like trying to ward off this pressure from people asking me to write and perform food poems, which I could never really do. It just never felt right to me. So after my first pamphlet came out, which is War Dove, came out in 2020, I started kind of writing poems that were kind of not in response to the community around me, because my first pamphlet was written when I was very active in the spoken word scene in London, open micing and doing feature sets, not a lot, and also running my own open mic night with some friends, which was very amazing and very fun. But the result of that was the poems I was writing at the time were quite in communication and in community with my peers. So when the pandemic happened, I was rendered sort of stuck at home for about 6 months. And that meant that I didn't have the usual stimuli to bounce off of. And I started writing about what I like to wear, what I don't like to wear. A lot of online shopping took place that time, and I started writing about the adverts and the videos and the imagery and the advertisements that I used to kind of just consume when I was bored at home, and start to think politically, kind of like how that affects my body, and what about that persuades me to either want to or not want to purchase that piece of clothing, and how that triggers a part of my brain that imagines how that piece of clothing would then feel on me, how it would move in it, how it would communicate with other people, and from a kind of phenomenological perspective, maybe kind of imagine and remember, and then maybe predict as well how such a piece of clothing or a piece of jewelry or perfume will affect the ways in which I am approached by others, or how I'm interacted by others, and how that interaction then helps me or kind of has an effect on how then I form a relationship with myself. So that was kind of the basis of those poems about clothing and jewelry, because I was very, at the end of the day, I was very concerned and excited by the political undertones of such a part of our identity, which something I had to kind of prove. Neon Manila feels like a thesis to me almost that I had to defend, because I was writing this book when there was this conversation about poems about clothing as kind of not the most relevant, not the most important, and perhaps something that's a bit more frivolous. And I found the tension there very interesting, because I inherently disagreed. So yeah.
I am wondering if I may ask a follow-up question to this idea of the politics of fashion you just kind of hinted on. I wonder how that came to shape your language, and I'm not going to make a specific reference to Neon Manila, your upcoming collection, because we'll talk about that later anyway. But I wondered if you'd like to say something about, as you became conscious and as you kind of gave into your aesthetic need, how you, I wonder if your language kind of had been impacted by that change.
I think so. I think it has had a huge impact in my approach to poetic language immensely. One example would be as simple as part of my research for the collection, I started really looking at the language that is being used in websites for clothing and jewelry, and the kind of how do you call it, the kind of the writing that's still copywriting, the copywriting that people use to sell these items. I remember for one of my poems, I think it was the first one, the sunglasses one, hashtag UK5378 or something like that.
Great title, by the way.
Thank you. Yes, it was very fun. I was very conscious of borrowing language from the website, from a clothing website that uses color and description and kind of narrative to sell a dress or a pair of sunglasses or a pair of boots. You know, the way they describe trousers as a trouser, you know, or the way they use colors. It's not yellow, it's canary, it's taupe, it's caramel, and it's meant to evoke this sensuality and sensuousness that you attach onto the item, which then persuade you to want it, because then to have that piece of clothing or piece of accessory on you means that you're embodying or inhabiting that feeling or that kind of, that sensation, which I was very interested in. So I was reading a lot about sort of Vogue magazines. I was in Net-a-Porter a lot, Victoria Beckham, sort of, reading about jewelry from Tiffany & Company and Van Cleef & Arpels, and just seeing how they use a sort of like persuasive language to make you feel that by acquiring such an object, you are adding more to yourself, not just from a physical perspective, but from almost like a spiritual, sensual perspective, which I'm such a fool for it. I love it. I love that stuff. I go crazy over it. But I'm also very aware of the active participation that people do in order to kind of tell you to buy it. Um, what else in terms of language? Also, I think I started really performing poems from Neon Manila this year, 2025, even though the book has been in progress since 2020. And at that point, my second pamphlet had just come out, Symmetric of Bone, which is also about jewelry, but from a kind of more concentrated, one-faceted level. Whereas for Neon Manila, it's more so an amalgamation of multiple objects. And I find myself jumping from one voice to another between publications. And with Neon Manila, I find myself kind of speaking with more of a sarcasm, of a levity, or of a almost like a cheekiness to me, which feels organic and genuine, but it's something that makes me kind of want to, I don't know, it feels a little unserious, but also very substantial. And I think that's the effect of creating this very kind of like palpable body of work that is trying to say something very individual. Yeah.
I think when we were talking earlier on, I mentioned that there is a palpable sense of joy under each of the poem, but I think there's also something else underneath, and that is maybe this sense of cheeky grin I can feel that that's going on as you are composing or editing.
Yeah, and that's something I've also been very conscious of. Mainly because the first pamphlet I released was very sad. So War Dove came out at a time when I needed to kind of experience and explore and sort of narrate what it was like to come out as a queer person, which was very turbulent and it was full of things that I can't control, and the things that I can control, I was coming to compromise with that. And a lot of that wasn't a concern by the time I got to Neon Manila. I was very much aware of the fact that, I've been about lived experiences that were quite sad and were quite, quite sad, and something that doesn't feel like that encapsulates my experience very much. Of course, I experienced the turbulent and the sad parts as well, but a lot of my experience of being a queer person is extremely unserious and unhinged and chronically online and very funny and very sparkly as well. A lot of community, a lot of laughter, and a lot of joy, and a lot of pleasure as well. And that's something that I again felt like another challenge to me as a poet. How do I write poems in this facet and make my reader believe that these poems are substantial and political as well? So yeah, I'm glad that people are getting the cheekiness for the book, because it's very conscious, and it feels like an achievement that people are enjoying it in that way. So this poem is called Order Number #UK 65388. The video advert IDs her as a creative professional. Jacket and trouser in biscuit, roll neck canary, caramel shades she rests easy behind. Through them, she controls how much is seen, what can be accessed. When she turns to stretch, exposing her jawline, the light slides across the rims like sun against skyscraper. She is taller than she has ever been. I wonder how much of her I could become. If the exact pair will help me leave a trail of chic in my wake, a breeze people will brush against when I stroll past them, out in the city, white background permanent behind me.
I know about your keen interest in music and wanted to know how this informs or influences your poetry.
Thank you for asking that question. As I say, I come from sort of the Barbican poets of the the late 2010s, which was a beautiful time. And I was surrounded by a lot of poets who were interested in sort of writing poems in response or kind of in communication with the music they were listening to at the time. A lot of hip hop music, a lot of rap music, R&B, which was quite fun. And I was really inspired by the ways in which that my peers were creating such multifaceted bodies of work. And a lot of them have also become musicians and producers and have recorded poems to music as well as a kind of, again, interdisciplinary pieces of work that transcends the page and the stage. And I kind of took a leaf out of their book and sort of thought about the music that I was interested in, music that inherently moved me. And especially for Neon Manila, I was very much embracing my relationship with pop music, sort of disco and dance pop music. Sort of, again, trying to find the politics and the meaning and the kind of earthiness of a kind of art that people don't consider to be art. But for some reason I really resonate with, and I write poems in response to them and kind of find myself being moved and experience catharsis from music by Troy Sivan and Kylie Minogue and Janelle Monáe and Sabrina Carpenter, sincerely. And just finding kind of, I enjoy the tension of a kind of music that people listen to and enjoy, but don't consider to be things that were difficult to produce or difficult to create. And I don't know why I just really gravitated towards them, but they became very central to Neon Manila because, again, they form part of how I'm queer, how I'm a brown person, and how I am otherwise the body that I am now, and it kind of making space and making a sort of like an honorary kind of space for them to exist within my identity as a poet, because there's a truth to their the kind of relationship that they have with me. It's even got to the point where in preparation for the promotion of this book, I recorded about 10 poems from the collection to original music with multiple producers, and they're coming out as an album with sort of like within the same time the book comes out, as a way of spreading word about the book to people who probably don't read poems from books or prefer to hear poetry from other mediums, sort of like on Spotify or in YouTube or stuff like that. But also, recording the poems to that kind of music was really fun, because also it was a way of further cementing the voice and the kind of tone and the feel that I wanted the poems to inhabit. So if you were to listen to one of my singles, you would then kind of feel like, oh, this is kind of more the poem's identity, which I hope would be quite fun and quite an enjoyable experience. And it was just really fun to do, and it's something I've always wanted to achieve and say that I've done. We also have done 3 music videos as well as kind of singles for the book, which was quite fun, because I had this idea that Neo Manila can be kind of like my thank you, or my kind of like my offering to pop music.
Yeah, contribution.
Contribution to kind of pop music, to say that, hey, thank you, your effect on me has become this. It's even, I remember someone read an early version of the manuscript, and that they said that they enjoyed reading the book because it was easy to kind of return to. A lot of the poems were repeatable. It was easy to kind of keep going back to them over and over again, which feels like an achievement in terms of, a lot of pop, a good pop song is considered good because you can keep listening to it over and over again, and it seems like an effortless thing. So I love the fact that my poems have kind of had the same effect on people. Yeah.
I think even without you having explained what you have, the the poems in Neon Manila have this, this sense of musicality about
Mm-hmm.
them, which uh, I think it's your use of language
Mm-hmm.
maybe, and also the tonality of all the identities you belong in.
Yes, yes, I guess so. And I'm grateful that you picked up on that. Yeah, yeah. And I think, again, that's also a result of my conscious decision to inhabit a lightness and a humor to the poems, um, which feels new to me when I was writing these poems. So I'm glad that people are resonating. So, yeah.
We've talked about your debut collection, Neon Manila, published by Nine Arches Press, and that comes out, I think, on the 30th of
October.
October, if
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And you published two pamphlets previously,
Mm-hmm.
but sticking to Neon Manila, this navigates sexuality, style, belonging, and so much more. How did this collection come about?
Um, how did it come about? Suppose I can talk about it. So my first pamphlet, War Dove, came out in May of 2020, and that was during the first lockdown in response to the pandemic. Um, and I was doing a lot of online readings sort of to promote it. And I swear at that point I thought my career was over. I thought, well, this is my writing career, done and dusted. I don't have anything to give anymore. Because as I say, the lockdowns have rendered the poetry community I come from to kind of dissolve and kind of temporarily kind of separate, because the nights that we were running, the initiatives that were keeping us sort of together, had to take a pause, understandably, in response to the pandemic. So I felt kind of lost and kind of, with my own little toolbox as a poet, and I didn't really know what to do with what I did have. Um, and at that point, I remember, I think I mentioned this earlier, there were conversations about pop music and clothing that, like, I remember we were doing a workshop once and I wanted to write about healing crystals, and one of my friends said, I don't think you should be writing about that because they were crystals can be considered to be as too poetic, or as too kind of almost too much of a metaphor already, as an image. It's not, yeah, like yeah, as I say, they're too poetic already. Um, and they said that there were murmurations of the same ilk when it came to clothing. Probably felt too frivolous, and at the same time, kind of my relationship with my queerness was still kind of taking shape, because I had just come out maybe 3 years prior to that, and I didn't really know who I was as um, a non-straight body. Um, in the way that I found grounding and relationship with myself was through looking at the pieces of clothing that I was resonating with, the jewelry that I love putting on, the music that I love listening to, um, and really thinking about what queerness has meant to me so far. And that meant a lot of experiences that were funny, a lot of relationships that were so bad and so stressful that it made me have to laugh or else I'll cry, basically. And that was the kind of, that became kind of my relationship with my queerness, just kind of like this ridiculousness that was permeating throughout my life. And I kind of conscious, and also this conscious decision to associate my queerness with beauty and pleasure and humor, because they were my truths. They are my truths. And to kind of to write in response to what people were expecting of me was also a way of writing against who I truly felt I was at the time. So Neon Manila feels like a cementing of the very subjective and the very individual kind of queer immigrant body that I am, which brings me a lot of joy. Again, the book is very joyful, it's very funny, but going back to it also makes me feel joyful, and it still makes me laugh, and it still makes me feel very beautiful, and very proud to being able to say that I've written a book that people can feel the warmth and the lightness from. Yeah. So it came from seeing a gap in the literature to give an academic response, but also it came about this need that poetry was able to give me, this need to get closer to the kind of person that I am or want to be, or the kind of person that I've always kind of been, but I've never really been able to cement what that exactly is. Because I guess my queerness has never, well, at that point, wasn't really concerned with the naked body, it was concerned with the clothed body. And kind of what happens to that body when you wear a certain kind of turtleneck or a certain kind of shirt or a pussy bow blouse, or what happens when you don't wear a pinky ring, or the kind of feelings of confidence and sensuality that you feel when you wear a perfume that reminds you of your mother's makeup growing up. Those are the things I was very concerned with and very excited by. Yeah. So yeah.
I wanted to ask about the title itself, and I remember the poet David Nash, who last year won the Seamus Heaney Prize for his collection No Man's Land. He was interviewing you at the Aberystwyth Poetry Festival, and you do have this way with creating interesting titles for your poems, and I wondered how you came about with Neon Manila, because there's references to obviously your Filipino culture, but also maybe the neon is slightly pop music influences.
Yeah, it's very Kylie Minogue. The title, I remember when I was starting to formulate this manuscript, the title actually was the first thing to come up, and I felt really scared about it because I thought, I have not written a single poem, but I already know the title and I'm gonna stick my guns with it. I don't know what it was about Neon Manila. I remember I watched a movie from the Philippines called Dead Kids. The plot has nothing to do with the book, but it's about a group of teenage Filipino boys who try to kind of like fight a drug dealer. It's very silly. I love it. And I was less concerned about what was happening in the movie, but how the film was representing and sort of lighting Manila, because I come from Metro Manila, and my memories of being in the Philippines are very urban. Sort of the concrete and the grittiness and the sliminess and the chaos and the traffic of Manila, especially at night, they existed, but I found them very fascinating at night, especially because there were a lot of neon lights kind of coloring them in bursts of light, creating this softness that went against the graininess of the city, and that's something I was very fascinated by. And I remember that when I was watching the film, I was like, I love that image, and just wrote down Neon Manila. And the first version of the title poem was actually about Filipino immigrants' experiences of social media, and I was really fighting for it. It's like, I really want to write this poem, and then it became something completely different. It became more about the ways in which specifically Filipino queer bodies are approached and sexualized and sort of objectified within the London queer dating scene.
Right.
And then Neon Manila kind of took a life of its own because it became less about the city, and it became more metaphorical to the kind of ways that my body is touched, made love to, inflicted violence upon, the kind of beauty that is imposed upon my body, which is extremely racialized, extremely queered, quite concerning at times. And the pleasure that I do get from that kind of attention is something that I think about every single day, because there are a lot of politics and a lot of substance and a lot of problematic but also quite powerful and beautiful aspects to it that I hope that title poem scratches the surface on. So that's a goal I have with the title, but at the same time, I love the fact that you mentioned that it has a pop music angle to it, because I was really interested in kind of to see how my book would fare if I used a title that sounded like an album for a title for a pop album. At the time, I was listening a lot to Future Nostalgia by Dua Lipa, and I loved that title. I was thinking, Future Nostalgia, just like it just rolls off your mouth. And I feel like Neon Manila has that same cadence and that same color tone, colorway that excites me. And again, I'm thrilled that people are getting that message as well. Also, from a very unserious level, I'm interested in. I had this joke in my head that like people are gonna see the book and see the title Neon Manila and assume that the book is gonna be all about the speaker's experience of living in Manila when every single poem is set in London. So yeah. No one wants what I want. I'm not as effervescent as I look online. I slept with your husband. I didn't have to question your existence. You and the kids just showed up. A streak of light on his phone, he turned downwards on the bedside table. Before he climbed in, he opened the hotel window to let in the breeze, to dissipate the noise. All of Russell Square could hear everything he wanted to do to me. The things he did, the things he couldn't. My friends tell me to be ashamed for cracking into your marriage. I say, the entire time I wasn't even myself. I used a fake name, wore my gym trainers and sex boxers, told him I've been naked all day. It was whoever that was that held him.
You have another connection with the poetry world and poets via the National Poetry Library. Please tell me how this closeness to so much poetry and poetry collections and pamphlets shaped you as a poet.
I love that question. I've been working for the National Poetry Library since 2022, so it'd be 3 years now. And people always ask me what it's like to work for the National Poetry Library, and I say, exactly how you think it is. And it's really fun. I work with a lot of really great, talented people who are also artists in their own right, and writers, and visual artists, and sort of musicians, and sculptors, and artists, and novelists, and stuff like that. It really excites me. In terms of the collections, I often forget that I work in a collection full of contemporary poetry of 1912 because I'm there all the time. That I'm always just kind of reading poems upside I'm shelving. When we get new books, I just kind of like sift through and read a bit, and I kind of forget the kind of nourishing that I experience from that. And every once in a while, I think I would never have discovered this poet, or these books, or these collections from the 1950s, or this poet from Australia, or even uncovered old anthologies of Filipino poetry from the 1980s had I not worked at the library. So it feels almost like a bit like a process of osmosis being in the library, because I feel like my bank of poetic knowledge keeps growing every day, which has been very helpful for me in many ways. And one that I really love to go back to is that I assist with the vinyl in the audio collection, which is really fun. And I remember when I was told of it on my first day, I was very shocked because I was like, well, what do you mean I'll be in charge of the audio collection? We have audio in the library, it's crazy. And we do. And a lot of those vinyls, a good number of them are recordings of poetry nights that took place either in the UK or in America in the 50s to the 70s. Right. And I remember just seeing them, I'm like, that's crazy. That like, first of all, someone recorded these, and also they had these kind of nights and shows of that kind of ilk way before I was born. Because it kind of reminds me that, it tells me that there is a history to what we do as poets. As much as we are told and we feel, and maybe we are right, that we are the first of our sort of like our community to create these bodies of work. 9 times out of 10, someone's already done it in the 70s, which makes me feel really good because you're not alone. Maybe there's an error there in the way that these bodies of work have been forgotten or have not been part of the lineage or the history of the conversation of poetry. But I'm privileged to be in such close proximity to the library because I'm allowed to see and get into contact with history, poetry history in many ways. I remember a friend of mine released a pamphlet, and someone made an innocent joke about the fact that they used their face in the cover, and that kind of goes against this rule in poetry where you never use your face as the book cover. And I was just like, that's a bit silly, especially because at that point I've been working at the library for quite a while, and most of my days are filled with shelving books of collections and pamphlets full of people on the cover, like the poets on the cover. I'm like, well, that's been normal for so long now. So, why do you feel like that's new now? And maybe that's again the result of not having this kind of information as readily accessible. So yeah, it makes me feel like I'm more in contact with poetry every single day because I am. Yeah, I guess that's what I'd say.
Obviously, poets know about the National Poetry Library, but I wonder if you may just want to give a short summary of exactly what the National Poetry Library is and how valuable it is to emerging and aspiring poets, maybe.
So the National Poetry Library is at the Royal Festival Hall where we are now. And it's a collection of modern contemporary poetry from 1912 onwards. It's a reference library as well as a lending library, so if you'd like to be a member, it is free to become, to borrow books basically. And yeah, I think it's extremely important because it's a reference point for many people. It's a marker of, of achievement to have your have your work in the shelves. And as someone who's worked there for quite a while now, I've seen many people aspiring to be poets make the first visit at the library, ask us for help on some books that they would like probably to read or to kind of gain inspiration from. And then we build relationships with these patrons. And I've seen many of them start as just reading poems and now releasing pamphlets and being part of the conversation and doing such wonderful things, and a lot of that is because of the fact that the library exists, and it's become like this haven and kind of safe place for them to explore and grow that part of themselves, which makes me feel very happy. Pearls in a thumbprint bowl. I have finally mastered the currency of kindness, and I swear to never let it outsmart me again. My morning routine includes fishing for silver from a black glass bowl, its lip curved for the thumb. Inside lays a string of pearls, an albino creature I'll never wear again, so as to divest myself of the person who gave them to me. In the holly-go-lightly stage of my survival, I navigate the hot cement in crisp white shirts, feed on free gold and champagne from men who accept my English compliments and well-rehearsed smiles, VIP rooms and GIA certified rocks. Make sure to let them in just enough. Flirt over my past, not crack under heat like pearls do. Instead, come out of every interaction in an attractive, milky daze.
Who are the poets from the past and present who inspired your poetic voice?
Yes, one is Rachel Long. She was my mentor for Neo Manila, actually. I met her through the Barbican Young Poets. So if and her collection, My Darling from the Lions, was very influential for Neo Manila. So to have her kind of at the start of my career to kind of where I am now feels like a full circle experience, which is very nice. I'm also a big fan of Terence Hayes. Wanda Coleman is very important to me. Her invention of the American sonnet, and the kind of the idea of deconstructing a form that's quite traditional and something that you probably feel like you couldn't deconstruct was very powerful to me. It feels like, wow, you can really just do it, you know. I also love Ariana Rines. There's an Australian poet I'm a big fan of. His name is Sholto Buck as well.
I think I saw the book you were carrying.
Yeah, I just got his collection, his first collection. What else am I reading? Oh, Cecilia Knapp, Peach Pig, was very influential for Neo Manila. Also Marilyn Monroe. I always talk about Marilyn Monroe as a poet because she's very powerful. She's very inspiring to me as a poet. She, sorry, I just saw another map. I'm so sorry. Yeah, Marilyn is very important to me because she's a figure that people would never think of as a poet, but she actually wrote poems when she was alive, and it was compiled as a manuscript after she passed away. And it was just very potent and very honest and very real. And I love the dichotomy of our associations with Marilyn, sort of in contrast with who she actually was. And I think that's kind of one of the strengths of poetry, is to justify and provide space to our many contradictions. On my first visit to Gaze the Word, I thought of my parents the entire time. Not them now, of course. It's their younger, sharper versions that pounce on me whenever I find myself somewhere new. How they taught me to be aware of how physical I am, that I may be standing on someone else's spot. I'm staring at a bookshelf now, but I'm distracted by the thought of how my father would react if he knew that the son he called faulty and tried to whip back into shape, using threads of my ankle tied to a tree branch, is currently looking at books about boys liking boys, and nothing was niche about it. Nothing was blasphemous. Here, protest is not a disruption to peace, but synonymous with celebration. Here, a Filipino boy can enjoy his brownness captured in a photography book. The accompanied caption talks about how being queer has affected his experiences using dating apps. He calls it an exercise on multitasking.
You broached the subject of a second collection and having ideas about it.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you if you're working on, or what are you working on at the moment? Is there another collection that's out in the near or distant future, or any other forms of writing?
Yes. Yes, I am currently producing a second manuscript, hopefully as a collection. I have the aim of it being a collection. Yes, and I feel like I'm very curious to kind of get it started now. as I'm sort of promoting Neon Manila, because I have a schedule in my head, I would like to kind of have a solid first draft of the manuscript finished by the time I kind of finish the first wave of promotion for the collection. Just because I love to juggle. I love juggling multiple things at the same time. At the moment, the collection feels like an exploration of sort of disconnect and sort of disappointment. I wrote it down. It was I wrote a synopsis down. Yeah, it feels like an exploration, a meditation on disconnect in a world that's constantly trying to devour and touch you. And kind of, I'm interested in processes of and feelings of alienation through sex and queer desire and power, and also the ways in which that racialization manifests itself both internally and sort of interpersonally. But also still quite concerned and further exploring many sort of familiar themes that I've touched on in the first book, so beauty and style and belonging. Not sure where levity is at the moment. I feel like that will be more of an undercurrent rather than an active theme, an active voice. But that's something I'm interested in. Yeah, and I've started reading poems from that manuscript in Aberystwyth where we met. And I remember reading the first poem that I ever read from that manuscript, and it felt like an absolute different feel from Neon Manila. Neon Manila feels like Barbie almost. And then this next collection feels like not at all like Barbie's dream house. It's very different. That excites me. It scares me. The influences are also different. But yeah, it's nice to kind of describe it as it is right now, because I'd be curious to know how it grows from when it's ready. So that's the second collection. I'm also still at the Poetry Library, which I enjoy. And by the time this video comes out, I would have been working for quite a while now as co-editor for 14 Poems, which I'm very excited about. I also would like to kind of see how I develop as an editor of a magazine and of pamphlets. So we'll see.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, thank you.
Well, diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you.